Hello and welcome to episode 20 of It's Never Sunny in Seattle, a Seattle Mariners podcast. I am your host, your not usual host, but your host today, Michael Ahedo, joined by new co-host and audio engineer, Evan James. Evan.
Hello.
How's it going, man?
Doing pretty well. Excited to be here for the first time.
Yeah, it's going to be weird. We haven't, switched up the formula since episode 1, which was the pilot episode in which I was alone. But Evan is coming on as a third co-host and someone to make us sound nice and also dish some hot takes. So it is extremely hot. We're both up in the PNW, and I think it's going to be reaching the 90s pretty soon here. So I'm sweating, but I'm ready.
Yeah, it's going to be 100 degrees this weekend. Is that right? 99 Friday and then 101 on Saturday, I think. And they said 99 again on Sunday. So the AC will be cooking.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to go down to my aunt's house. She was on the lake.
Yeah, definitely get out on Saturday is the day to do it. 101 degrees is no good inside.
For sure. So yeah, just to kind of hop into it. Friday night, one of my homies, Day Schick, Kim. I was just like at kind of a work gathering, and my brother sends me a tweet from Day Schick where Day is at the game with his brother, and I don't remember what tweet exactly was sent to me, but it essentially started with someone doing a ticket check, and Day was like, why are you checking our tickets and no one else's? The usher made it seem very, very random when obviously it wasn't random based on, A, only them getting checked, and B, other kind of evidence that came up later. But it really devolved into a situation where they ended up getting their tickets checked 5 times at least that night, and that doesn't count, them entering and exiting their sections. I don't know. It's a lot to really unpack and talk about and really explain, and you can find it on his Twitter, which I believe is at Dayschick Jr. DAESHIKJR. But Evan and I were on the Lookout Landing podcast that also just dropped today, where we talked about that. I don't know if there is anything more that we need to say that wasn't already covered, unless that you can think about something. But I just kind of wanted to boost the signal there because it kind of went viral. I know that we use that term kind of liberally, but a lot of people and like a lot of national people were kind of talking about it. We still don't know what the end result is going to be from the Mariners, but I know that it's just a disappointment because it doesn't, no one deserves to have that happen to them. And it's really tiring for people of color to have to deal with, that kind of thing. So, Evan, I don't know if you had anything to add there.
No, I think I'll be brief, kind of like you, just because I think, people should listen to it. It's about 2.5 hours, so we dig in quite a bit and really give him length to tell his story and his experience and kind of, how he feels about it and some possible solutions and remedies. And it's something for people to follow up with, absolutely, like you said, and, check him out on Twitter or wherever else if you're interested in kind of seeing how it plays out. But it definitely, from a Mariners perspective, it was very much, like you said, kind of a viral moment for the team. In not a flattering way, again. So that's kind of how it ties into sort of what we talk about and what Lookout Landing talks about is, from a fan perspective,
things
how
before.
it all ties.
And I don't even think dealt with is the right way to say it. Like, they have perpetuated racism and sexism at all levels, whether it's, with like the managers, general managers and players, or their owners.
It would be fair to classify it as a pattern of behavior coming from people who are above kind of like the entry level positions within the organization is how I would categorize it.
Same. And it's not just the Mariners problem. It's a baseball problem. It's a people problem. And as Desha talks about, we don't need to rehash all of his words, but it starts at the top. It's a top down thing. So, if people are just getting fired, that's not going to remedy the situation. Like, these people are just doing their jobs. Like, one of his direct messages said that the usher was asked twice, or at least her stepdaughter claims that she was asked twice to go check on row 3 or whatever it was. So yeah, super disappointing, but I don't know. I always kind of say this, but it's really not easy to transition away from more serious matters like this and into less serious matters. We're literally talking about players who are nearly pulling off their pants. But I think, as a lot of people know, several players, or really the league, instituted a new rule with foreign substances where players are getting checked multiple times a game, and there are a bunch of arbitrary rules instituted to kind of police the way that players are utilizing substances. So not only is it affecting players who, are just using sunscreen and rosin, which it's more of a grip thing than a spin thing. But also they're really trying to target players that are using like spider tack and other substances that can boost, your fastball spin, like RPMs by like 300 to 500. So we've seen players like Yusei Kikuchi. I think he was down 300 to 500 RPMs in his last start,
Not
which isn't,
much, man.
yeah. Which probably means that he was using, a pretty serious substance. And that's just what my brother told me. I actually need to go on Baseball Savant and look before I spew fake news. But
Do not fact check anything we say, as always, as per the policy.
right. But a lot of players haven't taken kindly to it. Scherzer was, pretty pissed, throwing off his hat, throwing off his belt, kind of showing up the umpire. Sergio Romo almost took his pants off. So I don't know your thoughts, but pitchers are not happy.
They said something interesting on the radio, which is that apparently this game in particular was the lowest spin rate that Scherzer had thrown in almost 5 seasons. So obviously we all love Max Scherzer. He's very much a household name in baseball, but it is interesting that a couple of the people who really have kind of thrown a little fit over this seem to be affected by it in kind of a major way. And it also seems like the kind of thing that they're not going to be able to hide it all, because the spin rates dropping for particular pitchers is really easy to spot, right? So they're going to know about this. They already know about this. They're going to have a lot more concrete info as people continue to not do it. But I'm in favor generally of the fact that they do seem to be enforcing it everywhere and relatively consistently, and we do see guys not using it. Is that a mostly fair assumption that this is a rule that so far is being followed?
Yeah, I mean, I think Saris has tweeted out, like kind of what percentage of players have seen kind of downticks in spin. I'm trying to kind of scroll and find it now, but I know that it's more players are following it as time passes. I think it was, in terms of like, I think 1 to 2 standard deviations. So let's see. 32 pitchers, or 8.4%, are down 2 standard deviations in spin, and 101, or 27%, are down 1 standard deviation. So, if you take those numbers, 35% of pitchers are down 1 to 2 standard deviations in spin. That doesn't, that doesn't
That's
really.
pretty substantial.
Yeah. Definitely, in terms of, how much spin is being added. But when you think about the claims by players that, 60 to like 80% of pitchers use, that probably means that for the majority of pitchers, it actually is being used for grip and, the kind of upticks and effect in adding spin is actually kind of marginal, or at least not statistically significant or reaching, one standard deviation. So that's kind of interesting.
So just to clarify, what I think you're hypothesizing is if we're assuming that the players are correct, and let's say that 80%, let's round it. Let's say that 70% of pitchers are using some kind of substance. We're suggesting essentially that only 50% of those pitchers are using something that's affecting spin. Would that be correct?
I think so. Numbers are hard. I mean, if it's 35% of all pitchers, and 70% are, we claim to use, I think that's how the math works out. So, I think MLB got it wrong here. I mean, I already thought that sunscreen and rosin should be, kind of chill to use, and other people disagree. I'm not kind of a rules purist, so I don't consider it against the rules, especially when it hasn't been enforced. It's essentially been a gentleman's agreement for decades now. So I don't know. I really think that it wasn't a good idea. We saw that Tyler Glasnow essentially, not even insinuated, said that the rule change was at least, I'm not going to give a percentage, but like very, very, I don't know, it played a role in him partially tearing his UCL.
Yeah, he basically, he blamed it on trying to replicate his spin or his movement or whatever, without the substance. But I don't know how much I buy that personally. I think that there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that goes into that, and that pitchers and athletes in general are creatures of habit and, a little superstitious almost in that regard. So I'm curious to see, kind of in a larger sense, if other guys get injured pretty quickly, because you'd think that you would see the injury like with Glasnow right when it changes over, because whatever they're doing is not sustainable, without the tack. And so maybe that's not a correct hypothesis. Maybe that it will wear on guys over the course of the season, and we'll just see greater injury numbers by the end. But it is interesting. I think that your suggestion that not all of the substances are adding spin is probably good news for pitchers who want to use sunscreen and rosin, because if there is a conclusive study about this with MLB and they are doing the things they're purporting to do, having the chemists look at the balls and kind of compare substances and spin rates, they should reach those conclusions out as well by the end of the season, you would think. And you'd hope that would be something that they talk about in the next CBA agreement, although that's a whole other can of worms, obviously.
Yeah, and I think the most damning thing here is that, the Mariners, not the Mariners, but MLB didn't give players, like, I guess they technically gave them a heads up and said, hey, we are going to be doing this. We're going to be checking balls and kind of cross-referencing StatCast data with like lab results. But they didn't necessarily say like, hey, these are the rules that we're instituting and they're going to happen, at this point. So I actually do find the Glasnow kind of thing pretty compelling. Like you said, it's anecdotal. I don't think that we can say he for sure got hurt because of, these things. But I do think that it plays a role. And if you are, kind of gripping a ball like that, like, if you think about it, you're squeezing your forearm. And if you're squeezing your forearm more, maybe some more tearing happens in there, or, that can lead to your elbow. I don't know. I'm not a kinesiologist or a doctor. But I do think it's bad news.
Yeah, and like I said, pitchers are such creatures of habit that, any small change can really throw them off. And it is possible that he's kind of like our first test case subject, so to speak, of somebody, really having a mechanical difficulty switching over to this new situation. But I don't know if we can say that conclusively yet. He also had, my understanding was there was some barking earlier in spring training or something to that effect. So it's also, and we talked about the timing as far as it being anecdotal. This is also right around the window where guys are starting to throw more innings than they threw last year. Last year everybody threw under 70 innings for the most part, and Glass now is starting to reach above that, as many other pitchers were. So there are just a couple of external factors that are making it hard to isolate specifically how this change has affected everything. But I do like that you kind of pointed out the timeline of all this was strange because, like you said, MLB did say, hey, we're going to do something. We're going to have a rule at some point, but they didn't tell anyone really what it was going to be. And there was some suspicion and discussion even among the league that they might maybe they're going to allow some stuff, and them deciding to allow nothing, I do think was really what caught everybody by surprise. Would you say that's a fair read?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't necessarily know how to read into, the claims that pitchers are having to change their mechanics, and like I've seen people with takes about kind of pullback and how that can lead to injury, whatever. But yeah, I mean, I do think that's pretty fair. And overall, I don't know how much the Mariners have really been harmed. It seems like Kikuchi is kind of the main guy. I haven't seen anyone else, and just going through and pouring through the numbers, that's really been affected by, more than kind of, that can't be attributed to error. That's like statistically significant. Graveman seems all right. Just, I was looking through a couple. Graveman seems all right. Sheffield seems all right. I think I mean, there's I think Flexen's fine. I kind of doubt he's if he was using then like Spider Tack, then maybe he's just not very good. But Gilbert also seems to be within range too. So
Am I fair in assuming too that we don't have, other than Kikuchi, we don't have a ton of guys who, at least in the starting rotation, spin rate is really their calling card? We have had some guys in the bullpen, maybe not so much now, but recently, like I know that in spring training they were talking about how much they really liked Brady Lale's spin rate, even though he's not here anymore. So is it possible that just a lot of our guys are just not falling into this camp, or is it? Yeah, like I guess that's my question. It sure seems like a lot of the Mariners weren't doing this, and so is that a fair read?
I think so. I mean, I thought Logan Gilbert was supposed to be more of a high spin guy. In terms of like row spin, he spins the ball really efficiently. But I mean, yeah, we really don't have any high velo guys especially in the starting rotation. So for the Mariners, I haven't seen players being too upset about it. I think it was a different team. I saw that one pitcher seemed to be pretty excited about it because it's like, oh, you think like I could be using, sticky stuff? Like I'm kind of bad. So yeah, I think that's kind of the case. Like if anyone was going to be kind of like anyone on the kind of fringe, I think maybe you could see using it, like Flexen, was just in KBO. Gilbert maybe wants to add a little bit. Dunn has really struggled. But for the most part, I don't think it's really something that any of our guys would really be using, at least like Spider Tech.
So you could take that as good news, as that our pitchers shouldn't get worse, or maybe bad news because we should have been cheating the whole time to some degree. I don't know. People can make of that what they will. I think it's I generally take it as a good thing that we shouldn't expect a large performance variance from our starting pitchers with this rule, and that teams who have invested in that are getting the shorter end of the stick. Obviously the big example is probably Los Angeles because of how much money they invested in one Trevor Bauer. For this specific reason, but I don't know what anyone is supposed to do about it, because there was kind of some inclination that maybe you shouldn't invest in this if we're going to make changes around it. So Yeah, I think I'm mostly in favor of this going on, and I do hope they let people wear sunscreen because it's sunscreen, and it would be cool if guys weren't, just getting burned out there because they're worried they're going to cheat or something. I think that's ridiculous, but
And I mean, players have, it's really interesting. I saw a couple years back a study that showed like different predictor, like playing different positions was predictive of like different like cancers and things like that. And obviously there are some things can't just be accounted for by just the position. Like some of it, it's like, oh, maybe these type of people are more likely to indulge in these types of behaviors at certain positions. But I think it was found that certain players are more susceptible to like skin cancer, which makes sense. And baseball players spend a lot of time in the sun. So either they're going to have to wear long sleeves or like they need to be able to wear sunscreen. That's not acceptable. And
yeah.
I don't know that this is going to get in the way of that. Um, but if it does, that's really problematic.
I guess the question now is the timeline on when do they make an additional change to this? You know what I mean? Do they decide, okay, sunscreen and rosin by the All-Star break, or do they leave this rule as is for the remainder of the season, maybe into next season? I would bet that there are some modifications to this before we go into next spring training. But it wouldn't surprise me that much to see them roll with it for the remainder of the year, just in the interest of like getting it out of the sport as much as possible. The spider tack and stuff, I mean, obviously not the sunscreen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think especially if it happened like at the in July at the All-Star break, I think it would be pretty embarrassing on MLB's part because um like let's say that Glasnow did get hurt or like it did kind of speed up when he got hurt because of he wasn't able to use sunscreen and rosin. That sucks. And I think a couple other players have gotten hurt. Um it's just a bad look. Like you need to be able to make a decision, move forward with it. If they would have talked to the players union, they probably would have said that sunscreen and rosin is fine. They might have even said that spider tack was fine. It seems like the consensus is that something needs to be done, and that's within the players union. That some change needs to be made. But Glasnow said that 36 of 36 player reps during some meeting said that they were okay with sunscreen rosin, and that included hitters. So, I mean, I think you'll find that there are examples of players, both ways that disagree with certain things. But overall, it's only a little bit of spin and its grip. I've had conversations in the Lookout Landing Slack with John Troopin, with Evan, with other people about how the argument that players are more at risk of getting hit or that it's unsafe is not compelling. I do find it compelling, at least to an extent. We have actually already seen an uptick in players getting hit. We don't have a very big sample, but when you see fluctuations in data, it's definitely something to kind of look for. And I don't know how much MLB really investigated it or tested it with anywhere. Obviously, they use independent league or minor league players like test dummies or guinea pigs. But yeah, I think they really messed up here.
Yeah, and you'd like to give them the benefit of the doubt because it's been such a strange season and last season as well. Maybe for whatever reason the data they got back on this was wrong, but I don't feel like giving them the benefit of the doubt in most ways just because they're MLB and just because of some of the other things they haven't done well.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what's really at the heart of the issue is, players have to wear sunscreen. And even if, let's say, we know for a fact that sunscreen rosin is doing something as far as RPMs, it's giving guys an extra 100 RPMs. Well, that's still a lot less than the 400 we were getting from whatever Trevor Bauer was using. So it's like, we'll take that small uptick, that 100, to let guys not get cancer, but we don't have to take the 500, the 400 to let Trevor Bauer go from a middling pitcher to the best in the league because he has some kind of proprietary substance. So there is middle ground here, I think is the point we're both making.
Yeah, I agree. And the funny thing is that, first of all, I've heard from, I guess I'll just, say someone, that Trevor Bauer kind of got with, I don't know, a group of like scientists to kind of create like the perfect stuff, like the perfect foreign substance, the best that they could find. The funny thing is that he isn't like, I mean, he's striking out a lot of hitters and like pretty much as he has since 2018. But he's giving up a lot of home runs. He's giving up as many home runs as, he did in 2019 and more than he did last year. So even with the sticky stuff, he's not Garrett Cole. He's not DeGrom. He's let's see where he's at in WAR. Wow, it's like not that great. He
Yeah, he's had a
ranks
rough year without it so far.
28th in F WAR. That's not for someone who's pioneering spider tack basically, or like substances. Chris Bassett is doing better than him.
Well, I think the hypothesis that I think people are making is that he was using it all of 2019. He was using it at the beginning of 2020, and he was one of the first people to stop when they started, like checking him out for real. Because I saw really months ago, it might have even been as far back as May, that they were looking at his balls then, and I first started seeing people reporting on the drop in RPMs. So the theory on him sort of is that last year we saw the performance with the super tack, whatever it was, the Coke boiled or whatever it was he said on Twitter. And then this year we're seeing him without it, and he is much closer to kind of the guy who he was before. So that's sort of the theory on what's going on with him.
I think that he was using in the beginning of this year. I wonder if MLB even knew, but just didn't punish him. Because his spin was at 2020 levels until June 6th. And I think that's kind of around the time that we figured out, like, this is going to be happening. I mean, it's a drop off. He held it at like 2,600 for another 2 starts, and then now he's at about 2,500. I wonder if he switched to a different substance to kind of like wean off and then get back at something. But what's kind of interesting is he's at 2,500. He's not down to 23 or 2,400 where he was at before. So I don't know why that's happened. His velo is the same. Like the Bauer units are, like, honestly, his Bauer units are probably significantly better than in 2018 and 2019 because his velo is down. So, kind of weird.
That's a lot to unpack. I guess we'll have to see how the season plays out for him and just the general, the RPMs, just the whole thing, because there's just so many elements moving to it. And the thing with Trevor Bauer too is that he's just like such a strange guy where, like last year he came out and did it for an inning or whatever. And so it's possible that he's doing things somewhat intermittently too. And I think I saw someone say that it looked like he used it for an inning and not for another inning in a game or something to that effect. And I don't know who that was on Twitter. And, obviously inning to inning, game to game statistics are a little bit wonky anyways. But it will be something to look for, just how much kind of variance he has in that over time.
I did some back of the napkin math, and if I were to say that 25% of pitchers were getting at least one standard deviation of extra spin, would you police this like this, I guess? Or would you even ban like spider tack or police it?
Say that one more time for me.
So if I were to say that 25% of pitchers were benefiting from at least one standard deviation worth of added spin, would you police it or ban it like MLB is doing now?
If a quarter of pitchers were getting at least one, I think I wouldn't do what they've done so far. I wouldn't outlaw everything. I think that there's wiggle room in there for sunscreen and rosin, maybe even for pine tar, which I don't, I think is more towards the sunscreen and rosin as far as not doing quite so much for spin. Um, I don't know. It's tough. I think that I might have agreed to do nothing a couple of years ago, but I watched the Mariners bat like 190 for 6 weeks. And so in the back of my head, I have recently seen what really atrocious offense looks like over a sustained period. And I really don't want to watch that again. So while I do think it's an overreach, I also am semi-pro things that are going to raise batting average specifically. So there's a little bit of two schools of thought there for me.
It's kind of interesting. And my brother actually kind of raised this point. But the Mariners have been super hot fire for like weeks. They've been very good. Like they're 2 games over 500, 39 and 37, third in the division, 7.5 games back. Like that's pretty good. They're not projected to do that much better, but I wonder if the sticky stuff thing kind of coincides with the date that this started getting enforced. I don't know what you think about that.
It's an interesting theory. I think that we'll have to see. Obviously, we're only talking about like a couple of weeks worth of games, if that. But yeah, we could see how that plays out over time. I do think they seem to be obviously better now than they were back in April and back in May for whatever reason. So, maybe bats just heat up. Maybe the sticky stuff really affected them. I think when it comes to, and I'm really curious actually to see how you feel about this. There was a USS Mariner article a while back that detailed kind of just how bad Safeco Field has been through 2021 for hitters, and how good it's been for pitchers, and how much you feel like that's playing into some of this as well. What do you think about that? Like the combination kind of Safeco Field being so deadening for the ball and the, pitchers being harder to hit on top of the ball with this tack material on it not flying as far and having some different kind of aerial effect to it.
I forgot about that. I forgot that I saw that. I mean, yeah, that bodes really, really poorly for Safeco. And maybe that's why, after all these years, we've moved the fences in. Everyone, when they talk about park, they talk about the heavy marine, layer. The air is super thick here. So if you're adding extra gunk to the ball, there's a reason why balls aren't flying out. And like the right field fence has always been pretty hitter friendly ish if you're pulling it. They always kind of said that the stadium was built for Griffey. But I actually find that pretty compelling. And, if we do use sunscreen and rosin, that is a substance. But obviously, well, I don't know how obvious it is, but it shouldn't drag as much as something a little heavier, a little stickier. Mm-hmm. So maybe it is in the best interest for the Mariners to not have any foreign substances being used. I think that's actually a really interesting point.
I think so. And it also coincides with the new ball they're using this year. And there was, again, I'm referencing somebody else's work, but there was a Fangraphs article a couple of months back about the early returns on the ball in 2021 and how a lot of like home runs were turning into doubles and kind of balls of a certain exit velocity, but also launch angle were not going over the wall kind of. So you see like that kind of a reduction in distance combined with the balls having different aerodynamics because of the tack stuff and being harder to hit because of the tack stuff and the Safeco Field marine layer. And you have 4 different forces working against Mariners hitters at Safeco Field. So I don't know. I don't think there is a short fix for that. They already, like you said, have changed the dimensions of the field. It just might be something they have to let it kind of play out. And the flip side of that, obviously, is it's good for pitchers. And we see like Chris Flexen really take advantage of it and look like an absolute stud within the confines of T-Mobile Park. So there's good and bad to it. But speaking of which, so Flexen and Gilbert have looked really good lately. You're the pitching guru. Tell us a little bit about what's going on. Let's do Flexen first because he just kind of threw a gem the other day.
I actually missed his outing, but yeah, I saw that he was actually like striking guys out, which obviously is a departure from what he's been doing. One of the big issues with him is that he hasn't thrown strikes, like, which duh, but nowadays when I talk about strikes, I'm talking about, called strikes and whiffs, because foul balls don't matter to me so much. Balls matter, but not in the way that, like, if you want to be good, they don't.
Yeah.
In his last start, he was basically by CSW like a league average pitcher, which if you're Chris Flexen, that kind of works. His curveball hasn't come out as much as I'd hoped. But like in his start against the Rockies, he used them 16% of the time, which is pretty good. That's really the pitch that I've been waiting for to see, like, kind of when is he going to break out? And that's really how he's been using it for the bulk of the season. But it's hard to kind of pin down what exactly it is aside from velo. And he's been throwing harder for his past like 4-ish starts. I think he's just I think that's really it. I think for him, he's just throwing harder, and that helps all of his pitches play up better, because he actually has pretty good fastball characteristics. Like, he spins the ball with 92% active spin. That's pretty efficient. That's not like, Garrett Cole, but it's only, 7-ish% off. So, I really just think that his fastball is kind of playing up better because of a little added velo, which, isn't going to hurt anyone.
Yeah, and we definitely need him because, aside from the bullpen days, which it seems like are becoming a less common thing even now, we just really need guys to eat innings, and he seems like the obvious candidate just from both a health perspective and from how much he threw last year to be the innings leader on this team. And so far, by default, almost the WAR leader. So that's really good to see. But more interesting than Flexen is Gilbert, because naturally he's the prospect. He seems to have, I don't know if I would say turned a corner, because I don't believe he struggled quite as much as I think it may have looked like to the naked eye just watching those first few starts. But he definitely seems to have, figured something out. Will you talk about that a little bit and what you see from Gilbert?
Yeah, it's kind of weird. I wrote up an article on him a while ago, and like you said, like, I don't really think he was struggling as much as people were kind of saying. He's historically been, like, people have said that his curveball is his best pitch, and I vehemently disagree. It's really soft. It's not firm enough. He sits like 74 miles per hour with it, which means it's just like really loopy. It has a lot of drop, but that's not a pitch that you're going to get a lot of swings and misses with, at least, with its characteristics. So, I think one thing is that he's come in and that hasn't really been the weapon that he thought it was. Really, ever since his May 25th start, he has thrown his curveball less and less and less and less, to the point where in his past 3 starts, he's thrown it about like 5% of the time. Meanwhile, in those last 3 starts, he's been throwing his changeup more and more, where he's throwing it like 10% of the time now. I think it's good to get away from his fastball. I think that's a pitch that, is eventually going to be a really strong pitch for him. But it is a little straight, and that's not good, obviously. I think he's going to need something to kind of flash, and for me, that's really been his changeup. It's been his best like swing and miss pitch, and he's not throwing it a lot yet, but I've tweeted about this quite a bit. He sits like 78 with it. He's sitting 78.7 on the year. 94.6 with his fastball. So that is I don't know, 16%. I'm bad at math. 15, 16% fastball changeup velocity differential. That's elite. And I think some people might say that if there's too much of a differential, that's not a good thing. It's pretty rare, so I don't know that there's much evidence to support that. But what I will say is that the weirder a look you give hitters, like the more you set yourself apart from other pitchers, the better. There's not that many pitchers that throw a 79 mile per hour changeup. There's even fewer that throw like a 95 mile per hour fastball to pair with it. So I think that's actually going to end up being his best offering because the slider is okay to me. I think what we're gonna see is a guy who gives up a few too many home runs because his fastball's a little straight. He throws it at the top of the zone. A guy that can neutralize against lefties because he throws a changeup, and he gets some ground balls with it. And then, like a pretty good slider and a get me over curveball, which is used as a pejorative, but you can steal strikes with curveballs. So, yeah, I need to actually look up his CSW numbers, but I've been pretty impressed with Gilbert, and the command still isn't there, but it's better than it's been. So, yeah, we'll kind of see what that looks like moving forward.
Mikey always gives the best, like very granular and detailed pitching information, and dude, it's always just so good because my analysis is just not that in depth. It isn't. What I would say is that what I have done is I've followed Logan Gilbert for a long time, and every time Logan Gilbert has been promoted up another level, he has had between it was less when he was at lower levels because he was obviously so far ahead of the curve. But when he was promoted to AA, he struggled for 3 or 4 starts. And he wasn't necessarily bonkers out of the gate in AAA either for as little as time as he was there even this year. So I'm used to seeing him progress up the ladder and need to make changes to the pitch mix, need to adjust kind of to his approach to how he's throwing to players, and just generally not seeing the full package up until starts 4, 5, and 6 kind of. So when he came up and he wasn't just bonkers right away, I wasn't surprised. And also because, nobody's thrown very much. So when they had him going like 2 innings, that was a combination of him not necessarily pitching well, but also them just being so ultra cautious with a guy who's just not built up the innings that you'd like to see if you're going to have a guy go out there and really just, let it loose. So what we're seeing now, I do feel like is in every way more representative of a finished product than what we were seeing a month ago. And it's good. For the record, he is 5th in the team in pitching WAR with half a WAR. And that's in a lot less time than some of the guys who are pretty close to him. It's pretty much in sync with, like you say, Kikuchi, who's thrown more than double the innings. So how about we pivot a little bit to Yusei, because we're talking about starters here. There are some, not, I don't want to say concerning, but the underlying numbers for him are not necessarily as sparkling as the performances or how well it feels like he's actually pitched in games, especially recently, where we're talking about, like 6 of 7 quality starts and that kind of a thing. So dig in a little bit and tell us about Kikuchi.
Kikuchi, I love him. I don't know. It's weird because he has really overpowering stuff. I still don't think he's really optimizing his skill set. Like on the year by like xwOBA, however much you want to take that into account, he's been an average pitcher, a league average pitcher, which, there's plenty of value in. I think the issue there has kind of been that he throws his fastball a lot, which he can't really command. He throws his cutter a lot, which he commands better. But the nature of throwing a cutter, like most pitchers don't throw cutters that are swing and miss pitches. His is probably better than most, but it's just not something that you want to like hang your hat on, and he uses it more than any other pitch. So it's kind of unique. Like he's unique in that, I mean, first of all, his whole skill set is really unique, but I think that it's weird because there's not a lot of pitches that he can move to when he needs to throw a strike. And his fastball is a really good strike getting pitch. His cutter is a lot better than most cutters. I would actually, without looking up like a baseball savant query, I might think that it's the best for all starters. But I've been pounding on the table for him to throw a slider more for ever now, since like 2019 when it was his curveball. It has a 37% CSW, and his four seam has a 34%. So I really think that what we need to see from him is that, he moves more towards those things, and he moves towards more controllable pitches, because right now he does have a command problem. If you look at like Command Plus, he ranks in like an 80 Command Plus, so 20% lower than league average, which is really bad. Like, that's not even really doable for a pitcher. He has such good stuff that he just makes it work. I'm trying to find Saris's Command Plus grades on him, like at the pitch type level, but they're not good. So I think he needs to kind of shift it around. He throws his slider 20% of the time. I'd like to see him drop both his cutter and four seam usage, throw the slider more. That should be his second or first most thrown pitch. And like right now he has a 408 xwOBA on his cutter. And I don't like using xwOBA at the pitch type level because the inputs are really weird for like strikeouts and walks, but it just goes to show that it's I think more of a complementary pitch than a pitch that you want to throw 40% of the time. So, not only should he throw the slider more, but if he throws the slider more, it's going to help his cutter play up, and his fastball play up. So, yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see with the the sticky stuff.
Yeah.
But he's gonna need to move away from that fastball. I think that's pretty clear.
I think my follow-up question to that would be, do you think that, it seems like you have some suspicions that just the way he's optimizing, the way he's going about his pitch mix and stuff, that there are tweaks to be made that could improve him. Do you think he has a gear that can turn him into the kind of the elite guy that some of the performances kind of indicate he should be? Or is he just kind of a diamond in the rough in the sense that he has incredible stuff, but not great command, and he's destined to be a guy who looks more dominant than the stats kind of suggest that he is?
Yeah, I think that will kind of always be the case to an extent. One thing is that he needs to limit home runs, and he's not doing that right now. He did last year. So I do think that it's partially kind of a luck thing, because his home runs per fly ball was 19 in 2019 and it's 22 in 2021.
Mm-hmm.
So like he should have a higher K percentage than he does now. He should probably have a little bit lower of a walk percentage than he does now. And his home run percentage should probably be lower too, because he gives up a lot of home runs on his fastball and his cutter. And even like his slider, he's given up 3 home runs on the year. He doesn't bury a slider. He almost uses it almost like a get me over pitch, where he just like throws it in the zone. If you look at his swings and misses, they all come below the zone, like well out of the zone. If you can get hitters to chase like that, that's why throw it in the zone. His chase percentage is a 45% on his slider. It's like 30% on his cutter. So I think he can keep using his secondaries more, like even his changeup, which I don't think is that great of a pitch. It separates enough from his four seam fastball that I think he can use both of those more, use the fastball less, use the cutter less. I think really the cutter is just not the pitch that it should be. His barrel percentage is just bad on his four seamer and his cutter, and I caution people reading too much into numbers like barrel percentage, because they fluctuate so much. But I do think that they are both indicative of a pitch mix and pitch location issue, and that's something I wrote about a month or two ago, and that really still persists.
All that is very interesting to me, because he's such an interesting pitcher to watch, and it's really fun to kind of imagine that there's just a little more there, because you do kind of see it. He's a really good pitcher when he's on, and he's probably my favorite on the Mariners staff. I like Marco quite a bit too, and I do like Sheffield and Dunn, but Yusei is just his. There's nobody like him at all, really, that I've kind of ever seen, and so. But let's pivot a little bit, because I'm looking at the Mariners pitching staff right now, and somebody sticks out to me as being kind of an outlier as far as just insane performance, and that is one Paul Sewald. Paul Sewald has .7 WAR in 18 innings, which is better than Kendall Graveman's rate. And Kendall Graveman was one of the best, not just pitchers, but most valuable players over the first couple weeks of the season based on his early performance. Obviously, he's been a little less sharp since he's been back from the COVID list. But tell us about Paul Sewald and the seemingly random guy that we pulled from the Mets ether. Thank you, Matthew. Who has turned into a legitimate weapon for this team.
Paul Sewald is hilarious. I don't get it. I mean, I think it's got to be an invisible kind of thing. His CSW with his four-seamer right now is like 40%, and he doesn't throw like a fastball with good ride. Like, it's actually not very good. It's really funny. And he pairs it with, a slider that he throws it for enough strikes and doesn't get beaten up. So I don't get it. Like, I honestly, without having like looked into it, I don't know what it is that makes him tick. He throws 92. He doesn't have good ride. Like,
pedestrian stuff on the whole.
It's hilarious. Like, no ride. I don't know exactly what it is, but I think it's probably he just locates his pitches pretty well. Like, his slider, he locates just at the bottom of the zone, like, perfectly. So I think it's got to be a command thing. Maybe he falls back to earth because he is posting a pretty high fly ball percentage.
Mm-hmm.
But like,
he's also probably not a 14K9 guy. That's insane.
Yeah, I don't think so. But it's so funny. Like, he hasn't given a home run yet. His K percentage is 37%. So I honestly, I wish I could like point towards something where it's like, yeah, he's doing this. But he's just getting whiffs with his fastball. And when you throw a fastball that has a 16% swinging strike percentage, it's going to work. So I think I saw someone say this the other day, but maybe he needs a write-up. I mean, he throws from a pretty low slot, so I think he just gives hitters a really weird, deceptive look. Honestly, I don't know what else it could be. It's Paul Sewald. Like,
the thing that obviously stands out for me just glancing at his page right here is the FIP is 1.72, the XFIP is 3.48. So if you're looking for like an obvious kind of correlation outlier, that's the most obvious thing that I see. He seems more like the 3.48 than the 1.72 just based on pedigree, but he's played so well, so it's tough to say. And obviously relief pitchers are the champions of small sample size variance, so we might just be seeing Paul Sewald pitch the best that he ever will in his entire life. And if that be the case, then so be it. The Mariners have used it to put in all these walk-off wins. I want to say they're 14-1 in extra innings / walk-off games this year. No, it was they've won 14 games in the final at bat, something like that. I don't remember. I was listening to the radio earlier.
Yeah.
So Paul Sewald's been really interesting. Let's talk a little bit about Chargois, the French sensation, who I have always assumed, really without looking him up, is not very good, but has actually pitched quite well.
Yeah, dude. It's like, you think you don't know a lot about a player, and then they go out and prove that you don't know anything about the player. I mean, he hasn't been as potent as Sewald in the same way, but he really has limited walks and has struck out, a fair amount of hitters, like 30%. I shouldn't even say fair. That's like really good. It's funny because his fastball graded out really well. Like had a 70 grade slapped on it, but his fastball's not very good. It's really, I almost want to compare him to like Mashevitz in a way, because he throws a slider that, like, he just throws it in the zone and he doesn't get chases with it, but he does get swings and misses. So I don't know. It's pretty interesting, and I'm looking up a little bit of this as I talk, but it's really just a slider, that he throws for a lot of strikes, and now he's throwing it a lot. And I think because he uses his sinker so sparsely, he just kind of makes it work. I'm looking at his usage and outcomes, like +% of the time, and before it was like 60. So man, JT Chargois is hilarious. I don't know if the Mariners kind of have a type with the kind of low arm slot guys, and this is something that the Mariners have historically really liked to do, but I do think that they'll both come back to earth a little bit, and I don't necessarily want either of them pitching in like the bottom of the ninth with a 1-run lead. But they both, kind of make it work for different reasons. Chargois throws 96 and has a slider. He throws 86. He has gotten hit a little hard, but I really just think it's, holy cow, he has a dope slider. Holy, he throws a gyro slider. So that's it. Which means
he also
like
walks no one. He has less than 1 walk per 9 innings, so he's been sterling as far as giving away free passes goes.
Yeah, so he spins his sinker pretty efficiently. So I think he kind of runs into bats with that and gets swings and misses with the slider. This is a really, really fun find because I love gyro pitches. That just means that like the pitch spins like a bullet or like a football or a dryer machine that's, I guess, standing upright.
So you would say that has more horizontal spin to it than vertical, up and down?
Actually, it's really interesting. Like gyro balls are kind of do nothing pitches. They get very, very little glove side movement, which is kind of indicative of like a slider or a curveball or whatever. Chargois actually gets both because it's a gyro ball. It gets glove side movement or arm side movement. It just depends, which is really, really, really fascinating to me. So it's, vertically, like if he were to throw his slider without the forces of gravity, it would do nothing. It would not fall. If, so it's basically not falling. It just kind of floats through space, and it also doesn't get much movement either side. So, man, gyro balls are really, really interesting because if you talk about like seam shifted wake, which I know is a really jargony word, but like if you think about the spin direction of his slider, it literally could be in any direction on a clock. It could be at 12 o'clock, it could be at 6, it could be at 9, it could be at 3.
So is it unpredictable
really cool
for the hitters? Even if they know it's coming, they can't anticipate kind of the movement that it's going to have?
I think that's part of it. And also, like you just expect pitches to move, to do things, and it just it just doesn't. So yeah, I think it's a little unpredictable. I think I don't really know for pitchers like what it's like, for command of the pitch, but he just spots his sinker really well and he throws his slider in the zone and just makes it work. So I don't know, man. He's had good numbers since 2018. I think he's really a diamond in the rough. I did not like watching him pitch before, but now I'm fascinated. I love him.
It's pretty cool that the Mariners, for as much churn as there's been in the bullpen in particular, and on the pitching side especially, it's pretty cool that two of their three most valuable relief pitchers were kind of pile guys, to throw a lookout landing term out there. They were guys who were, Paul Sewald and Chargois were not on the roster out of spring training. They were very much secondary to the Gravemans and the Swansons and some of the other guys that were ahead of them, Will Vest and such. So it's really cool to see some kind of random, and I don't like saying that because obviously they're professional athletes, but some kind of unheralded guys really step into those roles. Let's switch over to hitting, because we talked a lot about pitching, which is obviously your forte, but there is good news on the bat side of things. We have a couple of guys who are really hitting and a couple of guys who are not. So on the hitting side, we have Ty France, JP, Jake Fraley, and Jake Bowers, and to some degree now Shed Long, who have all really come on. And we have our two veteran cornerstones, Mitch Haniger and Seager, who don't look so steady. So who would you like to tackle first? There's varying levels of interest for me personally among that selection, but who do you want to talk about?
I mean, I feel like for France and Haniger, injury aside, there's not too much to talk about just because I think they're just good hitters. I think Bowers is interesting. I think you'd probably agree. Like, he's basically been a league average hitter by like XWOBA this year, and obviously the deadened ball is going to mitigate that and probably disproportionately affect players like him. But his profile's kind of interesting to me. Like, he can hit the ball pretty hard. He strikes out more than you'd like for a guy with his profile, like for a guy who doesn't really always impact the ball and doesn't hit for a ton of raw power. But I don't know. I kind of think this smells like a strong kind of pickup. Like, I think he might be a guy that just needed a change of scenery. And maybe that's just because, he's running like a 412 BABIP and 123 WRC plus and his almost 50 plate appearances with us. Like, that's not that many, but also like that's pretty good. That's not a lot of strikeouts. That's also not a lot of walks, but maybe, you can kind of believe in some of that. He isn't a very good outfielder, which kind of hurts, but he can play out there. But he's kind of like the Evan White mold at first base, where like he's a plus defender there, which say what you will about having plus defense at first base. But he's definitely someone that like I think the Mariners should keep around, and I think I really thought he was a breakout candidate back in the day. He pops the ball up a little too much, especially for someone again who doesn't hit dingers. But I think there's something there, and I think that it will be really interesting to see if the Mariners can get something out of him.
All of that sounds good to me. He's looked good so far. Obviously, small sample sizes. It's nice to have a first baseman who's a real first baseman, because we've had kind of whoever is going to stand there ever since Evan White went down. Mm-hmm. He's a little more interesting to me solely on the basis of, and I hate to say this, but it really looks like Evan White. I'm not going to say he's done for the year, but there is some real concern that we might just not get to see him turn into the player that we're kind of hoping for. Definitely not this year, and maybe ever, because of the lower body stuff. But in particular right now, he played in, I believe, I want to say 3. I only know conclusively he played in 2 games for Tacoma after doing his rehab. He hit pretty well. He hit a home run, like a 3-run home run one of those days. But they took him back off the rehab assignment, and they have now, again, a full 10 days later, sent him out for a second opinion. And I'm not a team doctor. I don't know necessarily what's going on, but I know that it's a hip flexor injury, and this is a very atypical timeline for this kind of thing, and how it should have gone. And just given how long this has been bothering him, it's absolutely shocking to me that right now I kind of expect to see Kyle Lewis play again before Evan White to some degree. just because of the clarity they have on what's going on with the injury. And I looked it up, and if he does get hip surgery, he will be out for the year. It's a 6-month recovery time. So that's not good. So Jake Bauers, I would very much pencil him in as the Mariners' first baseman for 2021. And it would surprise me not at all if he's around next year and going forward just as insurance, because the team is not sure if Evan White is going to be on the field all that much. And that breaks my heart, because I think Evan White is one of the more, not just interesting prospects, but from a value perspective, he's one of the higher investments the Mariners have made in terms of prospects. So the fact that he's not playing is kind of a big hit to that. Him and Kyle Lewis both not playing is a really big deal as far as the Mariners and their those two guys being kind of the first up. So talk about Jake Fraley, because I have real skepticism over his long-term performance. Obviously, he's looked great this year in a short sample size. The walks are insane. I don't know if I would expect him to pace the league in OBP percentage, kind of like he has to. I don't know if he actually has, but you know what I mean, as far as he's just been insane with the walks. You mentioned that you think we might be kind of finally seeing the guy who looked like the star of 2019 spring training once upon a time. Do you think this is sustainable, or are we kind of seeing the highs compared to some of the lows we witnessed in his previous short stints?
I think that some of it is. I wrote an article about him a week ago. It feels like more than a week ago, but just really was impressed with a lot of the things that he's doing. I mean, one thing is that, like, if you think about how he's impacting the ball, how he, like, basically, like, his XWO bacon, his XWO on contact. So, how he's the interaction between his launch angle and his exit velo. Like, he has shown the ability to hit a ball 112 miles per hour. That's good. That was last year. He's showing a new ability to walk a ton, 24.5% right now. And I kind of believe in, like, some of this. I think that those skills aren't skills that you really can fake, at least, like, for the amount of time he's done it. I would believe that, his eye isn't as good as it's been. But, like, if you look at his rolling walks, like, and let's see, he's pretty much come down to, like, sitting from 14 to 16 percent walks, or walk percentage. And I think that's doable. It does suck that he's a guy that strikes out, again, like, more than you'd like for someone who doesn't really barrel the ball. But I do think that it's, like, a sustainable thing, because his O swing just continues to be well below his league average. Like, it's been, like, 15%, which is pretty elite. So he's showing, elite plate discipline, and he's doing things with the ball at times. He totally stopped popping the ball up, which is really interesting. And I can't speak to the plate discipline, but in terms of what he's doing with the ball, you can point to some mechanical changes where, he's starting his load, or not his load, but just his stance with his hands a little bit dropped. And then once he gets into his load, he's way squattier on his back leg, and his hands are again dropped. He just looks a lot more compact. Looks like he's able to kind of fire to the ball from a really athletic and grounded position. And we don't know much about the power yet, but he did hit some home runs off of, like, Shane Bieber and Phil Maton, or however you say his name. It's interesting that the pop-up percentage is down, because it was an issue before. And again, we're playing with pretty small samples, but he was popping up a lot in 2019, 2020, and hasn't done it maybe once or twice this year. League average is like 7, and he's at like 2.2 percentage. So I don't know. I kind of believe, I mean, he has the decent fielding, decent base running, and elite plate discipline to lean on. If he's able to do anything with the ball, if he's able to put the ball into play, at somewhat optimal angles, he's going to be good. And right now, his sweet spot percentage is like 5% above league average, which isn't like crazy good, but it just means, he's hitting it at optimal angles. So, I'm kind of into him.
That's pretty cool. And we definitely need an outfielder who's good, right? Like losing Kyle Lewis is devastating in a lot of ways, but especially because just the warm bodies they threw out there in his absence before kind of Jake Fraley was ready to go again were kind of miserable. And I joke often about how Scott just seems to love playing infielders in left field. And I really wish he wouldn't, but having actual outfielders to fill out the whole field makes a difference and means that Scott doesn't have to do that, and we can kind of have a real defense. And he's definitely not, I don't think he's quite as good defensively as some of the other guys we have, but he is very much passable. Average, maybe a tick below, a tick above, depending on where you place him. But so far, he's put up a 154 WRC plus, which obviously is higher than you'd expect to see from him long term. But he's been worth about a win and about 100 plate appearances. And if he's even worse than that, even if he's only 3 wins in, like a 400 plate appearance type guy, he's still very much a good piece that we're going to want on this roster going forward. And I take a lot of solace in knowing that we do have real outfielders, at least most of the time. So, and I guess we could pivot from that a little bit to, we don't have to talk too much about Mitch Haniger, but, kind of, we're a little, I don't know about worried, but we're seeing some variance from him that's a tiny bit concerning, and we're seeing some variance from Kyle Seager that's a little bit concerning, but somebody has come on lately that I know you're really excited about and that I've been very skeptical of, and that's Shed Long. And I think some of my hesitation with Shed is obviously I saw more of him last year injured than I've seen of him healthy so far this year, but I don't really have a good gauge for what a finished product looks like for Shed Long. So now that we're seeing him healthy and hitting, what do you kind of think that the optimal Shed Long evens out to be?
Ooh, that's tough. He's kind of got he's kind of a tweener. Like he's only 5'8". He's just a compact dude. Not a great fielder, not the best base runner. I honestly don't even know that there's like a comp for him. But he's showing some cool stuff. I mean, he's hit a couple of home runs. They weren't the hardest hit balls ever. I do kind of think that this is something that is a little bit of a flash in the pan, just like a couple good at bats in a row, in a few games. I deeply, deeply want it to work out because I love and adore Shed, but I mean, right now he's, before he's been a guy with decent plate discipline. He's chasing a little bit more than you'd like to see. The nice thing is he's being really aggressive on the first pitch, which I don't know if that's purposeful or whatever. And the swing and miss isn't too bad, but it's not great for someone who doesn't really get into the ball. So I don't know. Like he isn't barreling the ball. He's by like things like sweep percentage, he's about league average. His xWOB is well below league average. So unless, he kind of figured something out in the past, week, which I don't know that he did because he's hit 2 home runs and his like expected home runs is 1.1. I don't know that I don't know that he's here yet. And he's another player that like we kind of need to, to at least be like a good bench player. But the most concerning thing is he puts the ball on the ground a lot. And that's fine for hitters who are pretty speedy, but he's not the speediest.
Yeah.
He's about an average runner. So I'm excited to see kind of what happens with him. Maybe he's not fully healthy yet. I would buy into that. Like maybe he's not 100%. I just want to see him get some reps because, there are places that he can play. Ty France has plenty of, he can play third, he can play first, he can DH.
I mean, you can put him in those places, certainly.
True. He can. just like I can. Maybe not well. So we'll see with Shed. I think we need a little bit more out of him because he only has 32 batted balls.
Yeah, and I think he's only had 40-ish plate appearances, not including maybe today and yesterday. So he's under 50 plate appearances. He's still just warming up. But so far, so good. Struggling a little bit for the first couple of weeks, kind of turning it on a little bit lately. You raised a good point, which is there isn't really a clear paradigm for him, another player that he would kind of associate with the profile. The guy that I kind of think of, and especially when you say him hitting the first pitch, is good Dylan Moore. And there are a bunch of similarities there. I think Dylan Moore is actually probably a slightly higher upside player because his defense is a little bit better. He can technically hack it at shortstop. He was a shortstop for a while. His defense is also better in the outfield, even though Shed Long has actually, he's come up quite a bit in the infield. He's actually a plus defensive second baseman last year when he was healthy anyways. And I would expect to see that from him going forward, even without plus speed. So he's interesting. But we're running out of time here, so let's do the last segment for today. Let's talk about Justice Sheffield because he pitched today. This is Wednesday the 23rd, and he had another rough outing. And Mikey has an article out on Lookout Landing, which is actually on the front page of SB Nation for MLB, which was cool to see. They don't often post Mariners stuff unless it's kind of scandalous, so the fact that you made it there is pretty cool, in my opinion anyway. And tell us about what's going on with our boy because... It's a little bit, we're all feeling a little bit down right now based on what we've seen, and especially with Dunn being out for an extended time with shoulder injury as well. We'd really like to see Chef turn it on. So what are you seeing from him?
Dude, I didn't know that I was on the front page. That's rad.
Yeah.
So the first article that I wrote at Lookout Landing was that he was just learning a sinker at the time. He's always had a absolute bowling ball of a fastball, a four-seam fastball that just gets a ton of sink because he spins it so inefficiently, has more gyro spin than anyone. And at the time, as time passes, I learned more and more about pitching, but I was excited about it because I was like, okay, in theory, he's using, a two-seam grip with his changeup and his sinker. Maybe they tunnel well together. Theoretically, a sinker should always, not necessarily always, but mostly tunnel better with a slider. And so maybe that helps his slider play up even more. And just maybe he commands it better. It's a pitch that he claimed to have more of a natural feel for, that he just kind of hopped right into. We've got a pretty good sample now that, over his 2020 and 2021, maybe that's not the case. He's pitched over 100 innings now with a sinker, and the results are a lot worse than his 2019. The caveat is he only threw 36 innings in 2019, and one of those 8 games was not starting. But it looks like it's really harmed his slider. It looks like it isn't a better pitch, just in a vacuum than his four-seamer. So if it's a worse pitch or, even a neutral pitch and it's making his other pitches worse, maybe he shouldn't throw it. It's hard to kind of apply causality and say exactly what is the thing that has, kind of been it. I have a couple theories and they're probably related. His sinker gets even more sink than his fastball did. And like I've said before, the more extreme, the more different your pitch is than other pitchers, the better usually. And that's maybe true for Justice, but he doesn't his sinker and slider only separate from each other horizontally and not vertically. And that was kind of the case before too. But it's even worse now. And so I think that first of all, his location is just not ideal. I think that he's not commanding his sinker well. I think that he's not commanding his slider as well anymore because his slider actually changed a little bit after 2019. And I kind of think, if he's got two horizontal east-west pitches, pitches that moved side to side a lot, maybe he should be pitching side to side a lot more. And he's not doing that. He's, pitching really north-south, which, a pitcher like, I wish I could like Flexen should do. But not someone like Justice Sheffield. So basically, I think he needs to pitch his sinker to his arm side more, his slider, kind of keep doing what he's doing with it. But in general, I think he probably needs to move back to the four-seam fastball. Other options are to tweak his slider or to add a curveball, add a cutter. I think a cutter is actually probably a good idea. He could even just become a cutter slider pitcher, but it's just hard to know. It's just hard to have success as an MLB pitcher when you don't have good command, when you don't throw hard. And since 2020, he hasn't had a plus pitch either. So that's a really, really bad recipe for, becoming even an average MLB pitcher. And, for the most part, he's made it work, but I really don't like to speak ill of pitchers, but he's been pretty disastrous in 2021.
So you answered one of my questions, I think, with that response, but I want to clarify the answer, which is that I think a lot of us are wondering, we've always really wondered what his ultimate upside is. Would you say that in your mind, maybe even making some of these changes, but in the absence of some of these changes as well, because it seems like he might do some of them, he might do none of them. Do you think his ultimate upside is even still in the rotation, or has his recent performance as kind of dismal and sub-major league in some cases, as it's been, kind of forced you to reevaluate him to a lower tier, or do you still think he can kind of be a 3, 4, 5 guy if it all breaks right?
I think that it's hard to see right now, but I don't know. I think that his ceiling is like a number 4 or 5 guy. He probably should, move to the rotation. I mean, he doesn't throw hard. He used to throw like 95, 96, 97. He sits 92 now. I mean, if he just goes more slider heavy, like that's one thing, but we've seen him toy with that in games. Like, I think one game he threw his slider more than he did his sinker, which is really cool to see. But he did really poorly that game. Like, he's done it actually in his past 2 games. And like from a strikes and whiffs percentage, or called strikes plus whiffs percentage, like a 13% CSW, which is like half of the league average. And only a little bit less than half of like the pitches average. So I think his future is probably in the bullpen. If we want to salvage this, he probably needs to go slider heavy, add something like a cutter, and maybe go back to his four-seam fastball. Or, there are so many routes because you can make so many subtle changes and there's so many permutations of all of them. But he can also just start throwing his fastball at the top of the zone, his four-seam fastball, because as if you're a hitter, you just look down. You just look at the bottom of the zone. You're not going to get a pitch at the top of the zone. And if you do, just maybe don't swing, because you know that you're going to get a heavy sinker. Sinkers are made to run into bats. So you're going to get something down there. Just don't swing. So he needs to give hitters another look. And I think that probably looks like more four-seam fastballs at the top of the zone, more sliders in general. But like, if you can't command it, that might not work either. And he's not commanding his pitches. So in short, I think he needs to up his stuff. And right now he doesn't have good stuff. So lots of different
tall task.
Yeah, it's not easy. But I mean, it's something that can be done. We've seen worse pitchers, kind of work out. But yeah, right now he just has an above average slider and a horrible sinker and not great changeup. So not great.
Yeah, that's kind of it's pretty pessimistic sounding, but it's it's all appropriate. And I would say that I heard Scott before the game today, which is Wednesday, and he was talking about Sheffield, who pitched today, and I believe he went 5 1/3 and was taken out with 2 guys on, giving up 3 runs through that particular frame, and up to that point, I mean, not in the 5th. But Scott said something which I thought was actually pretty. I don't want to say pretty damning, but it was not good. It was not convincing me that good things are about to happen. He said that Chef needs to get back to just getting one guy out at a time. And that's a really stark contrast from the Scott who was leaving him out there in the 6th when he was giving up runs 6 weeks ago and talking about, having faith in Sheffield and how he, believes in him and wants to give him length to kind of figure stuff out. We're not really seeing that anymore. We're seeing that they've taken a step back with him. And maybe the team has reevaluated a little bit of kind of what they expect from him. So I think that there's the pessimism on all fronts is fair here. And it's disappointing because he's a guy you really like to feel comfortable about going forward, given that we need starting pitchers quite badly. And we need guys who can throw innings. And it would be really nice to count on him. But I think that's it for me. Do you have anything else you want to add?
I mean, really, like just today, he had a 15% CSW with his sinker. So that's 6 called strikes and whiffs over 41 pitches. His slider was good, but his changeup was a disaster too. And like he didn't have a very strong night. So I think something's going to happen. I don't know what it is. The Mariners have a really good pitching development program, so they should be able to salvage him. But I guess we'll see. So. Evan, thank you so much for joining us. I think Andy and I can speak for the both of us that we're really excited to have you on. So everyone, I mean, if you're listening, you've probably listened before. I'm Michael. You can find me on Twitter at DisIMikey. You can find Evan on Twitter at Evan James Audio. He does a lot of pretty dope, music stuff.
Dabble.
Audio engineering stuff now for us too. And then you can find the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I think pretty much anywhere. You can support us on Patreon by going to patreon.com/neversunnyinseattle. Got to keep the lights on. So yeah, thank you so much for listening and go Mariners.
Go Mariners.